Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the 7th tutorial for English Introduction to Literary Studies. It's the one on Death and the King's Horseman. So it's very good to have you here. It's an important play because you know that you've got to hand in your last assignment. I think it's in 2 weeks' time, isn't it? Anyway, it's all on Funda. And the question in the drama section is a comparative question. So first of all, I want to say a little bit about comparative questions. Go and look as soon as it opens and see what the questions are, and then choose the one that interests you most. And you will find that you will have to compare 2 of the 3 plays, no matter which choice you make. Now, how do you do this? My advice to you is to refer to the text as often as possible. Yes. Okay. Must I stop? Okay. Sorry. One. Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. We just wanted to add somebody who wants to join us today. Right, so we're talking about comparative essays. And my advice to you very strongly is that you must refer to both texts. And I mean in detail. You must really quote episodes and words from both texts as you compare. Now, you can compare in a literary way by asking yourself, what is the function of this character? Or what is the dramatic irony here? Or what is the plot and the character development? And what is the aim of the entire drama? And find as many things as you can that are similar, and then compare them in detail. Also, you must find as many things as you can that are in contrast with each other, and then mention those again. But try to avoid generalizations. Try to be specific. In other words, don't say, this play is about culture. Say, this play is richly steeped in culture. For example, look at the use of proverbs and so on. Okay, so that is my best advice to you. If you're comparing 2 plays, keep referring to both of them in detail and find points of similarity and points of contrast that you can highlight. And then you should be fine. Right. I want to start off by giving a little feedback on the novels that you wrote. So we'll go there. Let's have a look at the slides. And you'll see your novels, the results have been uploaded to Funda. And I've sent you back a copy of your assignment, your essay. And you'll see there's an L, K, and a U. Now, as mentioned in Funda, the L is for literary language. Did you use appropriate literary language? And academic language as well. You know, is your essay formal enough? And then the K is for your knowledge of the chosen work. If you wrote about the joys of motherhood, which was the more popular choice, did you refer in detail to the characters by name, and did you refer to specific incidents? It's no good just saying, I understand this kind of culture and talking a lot about your own without going to the details and the specifics of the original text. Okay, and then the last mark, and these were all out of 10 marks, making a total of 30, was for your originality, your own understanding of the text and your insights and even your maturity as you judge these things and talk about them. So the last mark is the one for your personal deep understanding of what is going on. Great. I must congratulate you. I felt that there was a general improvement, that you had benefited from assignment 1 and that you tended on the whole to do better in assignment 2. Now, I've picked out just a few things that I want to mention in my feedback. And the first thing is beware of 2 different things. The first one is sweeping statements. Some of you are inclined to say, everybody does this, all mothers do this, all people think that. And it's never true, you know. You can always find an exception, and it sounds very unacademic. So please substitute most people for all people if you believe that to be true, but don't make sweeping statements. Good. And then the other thing that I want you to be aware of is run-on sentences. It's amazing how many people just don't put a full stop at the end of a sentence. A pause is not enough, a comma, if you are giving 2 full sentences, each with their own verb and subject. Look at the example. Nu Ego was born to Akbadi and Orna. She was precious to her father because she was the only reminder that he had of her mother, who died during her 2nd delivery to a stillborn child. Now that's a very good example of what should go into an introduction. It's accurate, it refers to people by name, it gives you a nice background setting for everything that's going to happen. But can you see where the sentence runs on when it should not? I hope so. It's here. This should not be a comma. This is a full sentence. Nu Ego subject, was born verb, to Akbadi and Orna. That's just a prepositional phrase, and that's it. That's the sentence. Now you're starting with a new subject and a new verb. She was. And it's got its own subordinate clauses with because and who, but that should be a full stop, and she must start a new sentence with a capital S. This matters. When you are speaking and when you are reading this, nobody can hear that there's a mistake, but it is, in fact, a grammatical error. Right. Now, some vocabulary and word confusion that I came across. You bear a child, B-E-A-R. You also bear your hardships and troubles. It's the same, B-E-A-R. B-A-R-E means naked, or to make yourself naked. So you can say she went to swim in the moonlight and she bared her body to the rays of the moon. Okay? Now, the word stillborn is very, very good word and a very useful one for the story, because there are a few examples of children who have already died when they are born. Okay. 1 or 2 people confused overwhelming and overbearing, and they're wonderful words, so let's look at those quickly. If something is overwhelming, it could be a person, then it means it's too much for you. You don't know how to deal with it all. But if something is overbearing, or it's more likely somebody is overbearing, then they are bossy and they want to push you around and they make assumptions about what they're entitled to. It's a completely different word. Okay. And here's an adverb that some of you needed and you didn't know this word, so please learn it today. Frenetically. Frenetically means not just passionately, but in a hectic way and under pressure and panicking. Okay, very, very fast. So it's a wonderful word. Look it up in the dictionary for the full definition, write it down and use it yourself. Great. Students wrote phrases that are used in informal English, like all that jazz. And what the student meant was such sentimental balderdash. I'm giving you a very formal equivalent because this is the kind of thing you need to write in an academic article. Hold on a minute, please. Right. Sentimental means that it's not very academic, it's not thought through very carefully, it doesn't come from the head, it comes from the heart. Now, some sentimental things are wonderful, but some of them are really just emotional and they're not based in anything real. Balderdash is rubbish. Nice word to remember, okay? If you want to say that's nonsense and you want a smart word, go for balderdash. Okay. Now here's another word that you needed and you didn't seem to know when you needed it, and that is the word deprecate. Write it down, look at the spelling. When you deprecate somebody, it means you undermine their dignity, you insult them, you undervalue them. You even scorn them, perhaps even in front of other people. So it's a very useful verb because you might see that happen, and then that's how you can describe that behavior with one verb. Good. And talking about literary language, some of you seem to confuse these three words: a novel, a book, and a text. Now, it's not a good idea to call The Joys of Motherhood or Shades a book. It's not specific enough. They are both novels, and that's what you should say. But if you just want to refer to what has been prescribed, then you can say the text. And it also refers to the words on the page. That is the text. They are the text. Good, and I corrected myself, that is they are, and that's important too. That's our next point, singulars and plurals. Now, the first sentence has got a singular plural mistake and a spelling mistake. So if you can see the spelling mistake, just type it in the chat, please. This is all signs of a guilty conscience. Now, if they are signs plural, and it all means that there are a few of them, then you cannot say this is. You have to say these are all signs. Okay, good. And then the word conscience, of course, is spelled C-O-N-S-C-I-E-N-C-E, conscience, like that. This word, conscious, means you're not asleep, you haven't been knocked out, you are aware of what is going on around you. So learn the difference between those two. All right, here's another singular plural example. She was taught to play by some rules and it changed halfway through her life. Now, if you say that to many native speakers, they will say, what changed? They won't even understand that you mean the rules, because the rules are not it, the rules are they. Remember this, she was taught to play by some rules and they changed. This is a very typical South African mistake. And English speakers in other countries do not make this mistake. So even though South Africans will understand you, you must catch yourself and you must stop doing this, because it's going to cause misunderstandings. And the advantage of English is that it's an international language. We don't want misunderstandings. Okay, let's go on. Now we're going to start looking at the play that we're studying today, Death and the King's Horseman. Now, this looks like pretty solid writing, and it comes straight out of your study guide. So you must go to lessons and study guide and study this play, because this is what you must understand if you want to be able to write about death and the king's horsemen. Let's read it. Among the ancient Oyo people, it was believed that when the king died, his horsemen had to die too, so that the king would have his horsemen to accompany him to the land of the ancestors. In Yoruba culture, the horseman of the king is a hereditary title. When the king dies, he starts the process of becoming a prominent ancestor, and the horseman has 1 month to die so that he can accompany the king to the final resting ground. The king's horseman would achieve this ritual suicide by the power of his will, knowing that he had to die, and so inducing death. Death and the King's Horseman is based on an actual historical event in 1946, when a royal horseman named Ellison was prevented from committing ritual suicide by the British colonial powers. Now let's think about that a little bit. It does seem pretty amazing, doesn't it? And pretty terrible. We have to be very careful when we are discussing literature. This play was written by a Nigerian for Nigerians and the rest of the world, and he is a very great playwright and poet, Wole Soyinka. People have great respect for him, and rightly so. He writes brilliantly, and one of the wonderful things about this play is the sheer beauty of the language. Like Shakespeare, he has both poetry and prose in his play, and it's all beautiful. Some of it is funny and kind of more low class, the prose, but it's still all excellently written. Now, it was a belief, and it was part of their culture, that a man who was the king's horseman, who looked after his horses, had to go with his king when the king died. And it horrifies me. I'm sure it horrifies you. But it's not our job to express our horror. Difficult as that is, we have to accept the culture and look at it from the milieu, the matrix from which it arose, and judge it only on its literary value. I know that's quite hard, but you can do it, and you should do it. So, how did he do this? It's an amazing thing, but it is historically recorded and true that if somebody absolutely knows they have to die, they can switch off their systems by the power of their will and their belief. And it had been done many times before. By the way, there are other cultures where things happen that horrify us too. In some parts of rural India, wives are still buried alive when their husbands die because they've got to go with them, and that's what they believe. And I would take trouble to influence people not to do that if I could. But when I'm judging their literature, then I may not pass judgment in that way. So I hope you get that difference. Okay, now let's look at the date. 1946, so it was the end of World War II. Nigeria was very much a British colony. And this royal horseman really lived. Of course, Soyinka has brought him to life with details which may or may not be true. He has used his imagination to make him real. And he was doing what his predecessors had all done before him. He was killing himself by the power of his will, shutting down. But the British heard about this and they considered it a kind of murder, and they interfered. And they stopped him. Now, Soyinka is actually very interesting because he's very careful not just to blame the colonial powers. If it was just a play about blaming them for this, it wouldn't have been a great play because it doesn't make much of a plot. But what is really interesting is that he describes Ellison in such an interesting way. He describes him as a man who adored life. He was greedy for life and he loved women and wine, and it was hard for him, harder perhaps than for most in his position. And that is why he played his part in failing to die. It wasn't just that the British stopped him. Right, now let's go on. Here we go. Right. Let's look at Act 1. As you know, in the study guide, there are questions, and we're going to use those questions as our guide through the play, and we're going to answer them today. The first question for Act 1 is, in what ways do we see tradition being upheld in this act? And I've asked you to consider language, music, and any mention of history and tradition. Now, the music is being played, and that is on traditional instruments. And I've got a list here. It's absolutely not complete, and it hasn't got the examples. You would have to go into the text. A lot of the text is on Funda, so go and study it there. And please find examples. The market, for example, is a tradition. And notice the kind of things that are being sold there. Notice that there are informal stalls run by women. Look at the praise singer. The praise singer is a traditional role. And the king has died, so the king's praise singer is now hanging around the horseman who is obliged to die next. And he is the one whose language is so interesting because he uses lots and lots of examples of Yoruba proverbs, and they're interesting and colorful and very graphic and descriptive. So search through Act 1 for examples of proverbs. Okay. Another thing that emerges from Act 1 is that polygamy was accepted. A man was allowed to take a second, a third, a fourth wife, provided he could afford them or the community didn't have any objection. So that is another aspect which we as Christians don't like and don't approve of, but it's not for us to express that in an academic essay, right? I've mentioned the proverbs and also the stories. I think that the story that Ellison tells in Act 1 is wonderful. It's a poem, actually, and it's about the not-I bird. And read it. I think you'll really enjoy the language. And what he's describing is how the bird that announces death will go to people and say, well, are you coming with me? And they'll say, not I, not I, not I. And he gives different examples of who he goes to. And then he says, however, I will not resist because I know I must die. So let's look at this beautiful quote. The horseman says, when the hour comes, watch me dance along the narrowing path, glazed by the souls of my great precursors. My soul is eager. I shall not turn aside. So he's completely decided, he's willing, he knows this is what must happen. Do you understand those lines? Watch me dance along the narrowing path. As he gets further and further away from this world, the path of the world gets narrower and narrower. Right. And then he says that this path is glazed by the souls of my great precursors. In other words, their footprints have made the path quite smooth. When you glaze something, you make it look like glass, shiny and smooth. So he says, I know I must die, I am willing to die, I will not turn aside. And I also want you to notice that the praise singer and the market women, led by the kind of lead woman, Ialoja, are often chorus-like. And when I say chorus-like, here's a point of comparison with Antigone. The Greek plays all had a chorus, and these market women, especially their leader, are like a chorus. Even the praise singer acts as the chorus did in the Greek plays. And when I say that, what do I mean? The chorus used to pass comments and tell you how you're supposed to be feeling about the action. They would give background information. They would tell you, this is a good man, but he's doing a bad thing. Or this is a ground-shattering event that's taking place now. Pay attention. So in that way, they're very similar. But they are also very different. So let's go on now. We haven't finished with Act 1. Next slide. The second question from Act 1 is, what conflict is introduced towards the end of Act 1? Oh, the first thing I see is a typing error. Sorry, it should be betrothed with a D there. Okay. Elisine, the king's horseman, that's Elisine, sees the woman betrothed to Ialoja's son, and he desires her. His last wish before he dies is to marry her. And this is something deeply shocking to me, again, as a Christian, but I'm not allowed to pass that judgment in this literary study. So I just keep quiet about that, because it's fascinating in a way that the man who is going to marry this young woman has no say in the matter. His mother decides. So the girl's future mother-in-law says that she's going to allow this. She is going to allow this beautiful young woman to sleep with Elisine because it's his dying wish. And she says, she gives a few reasons. One of them is that they might make the most amazing baby because he is about to die. He's already halfway into the spirit world. And this girl is so beautiful and wonderful. She thinks their children will be amazing. Here are some words of hers with a second reason for saying yes. It is those who stand at the gateway of the great change to whose cry we must pay heed. So what is the gateway to the great change? Well, that's death, of course. And Elisine is standing in the gates of death. And so she says, out of respect for that, I should listen to him. I should give him what he wants. And then she turns to Elisine himself and she says, now we must go prepare your bridal chamber, and these same hands will lay your shrouds. He then tells her not to be so insensitive, which is an example of the humor in this play. But it is astonishing that she's prepared to go and celebrate a wedding and prepare this hut for the wedding, and at the same time knowing that within 24 hours she will have to wrap him in his grave clothes. It's quite macabre, really. Right, so let's go on to Act 2. Right. Now, in Act 2, we meet the man in charge of the district. He's the district officer in the British administration. So he is normally the boss in this region of Nigeria. But today is the day that his senior is coming to visit, and even the royal family, the prince. So they are having a fancy dress party. They're all dressing up as something or other. You know fancy dress parties. And this man and his wife, Jane, the district officer, and his wife have decided to dress up wearing ENG1 masks. Now, ENG1 masks are masks that the elders wore when they were pretending to be mimicking ancestors on very sacred and special occasions in their tribal culture. And so they wear these masks, and when their helper, Amusa, is actually a policeman, when he sees them, he's utterly horrified. He can't believe that they have even touched these sacred objects with their fingers. But more than that, they've put them on and they're going to a dance to parade around. And he tells them how horrified he is. And in their reactions, we start getting to know them a little better. Because Pilking, the man, is utterly insensitive and just calls him a barbarian and says these things have no power and how can he be so stupid. But his wife, Jane, does try to understand a little bit. But that whole scene with those masks is used by the playwright to highlight the administration's insensitivity and racism towards Amusa and all his people. Okay. So, Act 2 continued. Here's your question. Jane is basically good-hearted. How successful is she, in your opinion, in understanding the local people with her brand of cultural anthropology? She at least tries to see things from their point of view, and that's why they say she has a brand of cultural anthropology. Now, I want your opinion, so you must go and study that part of Act 2 and make up your own mind, but you will certainly come to the conclusion that she's more successful than her husband. When he remembers Edison, because they come to him with this report, Amusa, the policeman, comes to him with this report that Edison is committing death. He calls it committing death. And immediately the district officer thinks there's murdering going on. And when he tries to remember Edison, yes, he says that old pagan and that old ram, because he had the reputation of liking women. And he was not a Christian, but his whole attitude towards him is patronizing, arrogant, and insulting. Right. Now, the next question. What cultural changes have been happening in African society? Think about how these characters represent change or resistance to it. And at this point, I'm just giving you a very brief thought about each one. You must add to them. Amusa, he doesn't want them to touch the masks because he is totally traditional. Even though he serves the British Empire as a policeman, he's traditional, his religion is traditional, and he represents African society, only changing insofar as they're willing to earn a living by getting a salary from the British. Now, Joseph is also a servant of theirs, of the Pilkings, and he has already been converted to Christianity, and he's unfazed by the masks. He doesn't believe they have any power. And of course, we rejoice as Christians. We think that's wonderful. But we're not allowed to say it like that in an academic essay. I just keep reminding you of this because it is important to remember. Okay, now Olunde is Elisine's son. This is the boy, the eldest boy of the horseman, the king's horseman, Elisine. And it's very interesting because the district officer thinks he's been so kind because he helped him to send Olunde to London, and he's qualified there as a medical doctor. That's a wonderful thing to do. But Ellesine didn't want it because he is traditional, he's not Christian, he's the horseman of the king, and he believed that this eldest son of his had to stay there and inherit the job of being the king's horseman. Instead of that, he went off and learned all about British culture and so on. So, Olunde is the most interesting of these four, because he's westernized. He mixes in English circles. He does not speak pidgin English like some of the other characters. His English is beautiful. But when it comes down to it, at the end of the play, he accepts his role, inheriting the role of the king's horseman, as you will see. Okay. Now, Ialoja is a traditionalist. She believes that all of them should stick to their culture, and she actually takes some trouble to make them do that. All right. Okay, now let's see the next one. Yes, that's Act 3. Right, my question is, what is the role of the women in this act? What do they make the audience think about? Now, when we met Amusa in Act 2, we felt sorry for him because Pilking treated him abominably, and he's a policeman. But now the women make us see that the ordinary people of the marketplace, the village, hate him. They feel contempt for him because he's willing to be a policeman for the British administration, and they despise him for that. And it's actually very, very sad, but very funny, the way they tease him. They tease him mercilessly, so you must go and read about how they tease him in Act 3. All right, so Act 3, this strange wedding has taken place. That's all over now. So Ellesine knows that he's got to die. And the question is, what is the role of the praise singer? And is he fulfilling it successfully? And just by the way, the praise singer doesn't sing. This is not an example of music. He speaks poetry and prose, and traditionally he is the one who is allowed to criticize the king if he's going wrong. But mainly he praises him, and he has learnt off by heart, before they had written language, he learnt off by heart their rich oral tradition. He knows all the history of the king's ancestors and the great things they did, and he sings their praises, but not musically. Good. Answer. The praise singer is conducting him in his passage to death, and he is doing it very successfully. He places him in a trance, and while the man is dying and answering him and saying, yes, I can feel I'm fading, and he goes very far away, Ellesine. The praise singer says, have they eyes to gauge your worth? Have they the heart to love you? Will they know what thoroughbred prances towards them in comparisons of honor? He's talking about the people who are already dead. Ellesine is going into the land of the ancestors. And what the praise singer is asking is whether the ancestors who are there will appreciate him enough. And he says that he's obviously hoping that they will see what a worthy man he is, and how he should be loved. And the metaphor is very good, because this is the king's horseman. So it's very fitting that he should be called a thoroughbred. And caparisons are those decorations. They're often embroidered cloths that people put over a horse's back for a ceremony to make them look smart and beautiful. And the praise singer says that Ellesine is like a thoroughbred horse, decked out in a way that shows how much honor he deserves. Good. Right. Now let's go to Act 4. Okay. Olunde seems westernized. This is the doctor. This is Elisine's son, of course. But his attitude towards death is very different from Jane's. Briefly describe what each of them thinks about this situation. This situation where Olunde's dad is expected to willingly die, make himself die. There's no violence involved. He doesn't have to drink poison or slit his wrists or anything like that. He shuts down his vital organs by the power of his will. Now, Jane cannot understand it. And here is Olunde trying to help her understand. He says, how can I make you understand? He has protection. What he's saying is he doesn't need the protection of the British police. No one can undertake what he does tonight without the deepest protection the mind can conceive. What can you offer him in place of his peace of mind, in place of the honor and veneration of his own people? And of course, that rhetorical question implies that you can offer him nothing. This is the way he wants to die, and he's protected by the way he's honored and by tradition and by the esteem in which people hold him. But Jane cannot see it like this. She says it is still a barbaric custom. It's even worse, it's feudal. Feudal means like the ancient medieval kings who had the power of life and death over all the people who worked on their estates. All right. Now what happens is that Elisine is nearly dead. He is shutting down all his systems one by one. And then the police arrive. And they disturb him, and he comes back to this world, so he fails. He fails to die. And how does Olunde react to his father's failure? This is where his Africanness becomes clear, because to him it is a calamity. He says to his father, when he sees him, and he wanted to hear that he was dead. Instead, he sees him alive, being brought in as a prisoner by the British. And he says, give me back the name you have taken away from me, you ghost from the name of the land of the nameless. And he also says, I have no father, eater of leftovers. So as long as he lives now, Elisine is going to get no honor, no recognition. He's going to be a beggar. So Olunde is horrified at his failure. That's how he reacts. And of course, the full story is he goes out and he commits that kind of suicide. He dies. And because, you know, he should have inherited the title of the king's horseman. And when his father fails to die, he dies in his place. So that's his ultimate reaction to it. Then they bring his dead body to the prison to show Elisine that his son has died. But before he sees him, he sees Loja, the market woman, okay? And she has come with his young bride of one night to tell him that he has to give his dead son his blessing so that he is free and the king is free to go into the land of the ancestors with his substitute. All right, now let's see 5.1. How well does Elisine accept his disgrace? He had a failure of will because he didn't die in the end when he was interrupted, but is he weak-willed? Explain your answer. Yes, he accepts his disgrace, but he is a broken man. he has a very, very strong will. I mean, imagine being able to persuade your body to shut down and die. And he got what he wanted in life. He was used to bossing people around. Obviously, you see that in the marketplace scene and so on. So he had a strong will, and he just has this failure of will when he's interrupted at the end. Here's a nice quote. He says to Pilkings, "You have shattered the peace of the world forever." Now that's a sweeping statement, if you like. And what he means is that our world has been destroyed. It's all wrong what has happened. And he says, you have destroyed it. Okay? And then Ialoja says, "At least we hope the man we once knew as Elisine remembers the lesser oaths he need not break." In other words, he's broken his big oath. We won't even call him Elisine anymore. But he needs to release the king and his son so that their spirits will not wander. And what happens is that she says, "Your career, Elisine," she's introducing him to his dead son, "cast your eyes on the favored companion of the king." And when Elisine sees this, he quickly yanks the iron chain with which he is being chained in the cell around his neck and breaks his own neck, so he commits suicide too. And that means that his very young wife can come and close his eyes, because when he married her, he said, "I hope you will be the one who closes my eyes in death." Okay, so we've already discussed this role of the chorus in Antigone, and we're out of time. Please go and read this play. It's not a long play. I know the English can be quite difficult, but with the help of this tutorial and your study guide, you should be able to get a lot of enjoyment out of it. Thank you for being there. Goodbye.